The most widely published book in human history reveals that we are created in the image of God. Throughout our human journey, each encounter is an opportunity to see the shared humanity in ourselves and others. Regardless of one's views on religion, each experience and each story weaves us together towards a common path. A path of transformation, a process of growth and understanding, a recognition that, at our core, we share a common destiny. What does the search for truth really mean in our lives? How can we find a sense of unity in a world so diverse and divided? As we reflect on these questions, we start to uncover a fundamental connection that binds us all beyond our differences. Welcome to Created in the Image of God, Building Vibrant Communities, with our host, Wade Franson. Tonight's episode is the Declaration of the Bath.
Good evening, everyone. This is Wade Franson, and I'm in the studio with my dear friend, Daniel Sanderson, and we are going to together provide you with a very special episode. This is the first time ever we've done this on the show to go other than a Tuesday night for a special event, and this is a holy day for followers of a person named the Bab and also the Baha'is of the world. This special holy day is the day on which the Bab, known as the Gate, declared who he was on May 23rd, 1844 in Shiraz, Iran. I'd like to start by giving the title, which is Lightning Strikes, and we'll get into that in a few minutes. I'm going to just read a biblical quote, and then I'll introduce my friend Dan. For as lightning comes from the east and shines as far as the west, so will be the coming of the Son of Man, from Matthew 24, verse 27. We're going to talk about what this means, how it might possibly have been fulfilled, when and why. We're going to cover a lot of ground in this special Holy Day episode. But first of all, Dan, welcome to the studio. It's been a while, probably since you were on the show. You were an early supporter and co-host. How have you been?
Excellent, Wade. Thanks for having me back.
Wonderful. And I know that you're not necessarily a swallower of every aspect of this, but you have a unique perspective as a philosopher. And in particular, we're going to also ask the question over the course of the show, how has the world changed since 1844? Whether you believe and buy this or not as being the impetus or the specific trigger, looking at 1844 as a pivotal point, what was the world like before then? What was the world like after then? Is there some merit to that viewpoint or that analysis?
Oh, absolutely, Wade. I mean, we're talking about two world wars. We're talking about the falls of dynasties. We're talking about complete restructuring of entire world orders. There's no map to the future.
The fall of kings and the rise of democracies.
Absolutely, right. Sometimes I reflect on that personally, and I realize the limitation of an individual mind. I mean, I don't think I can really grasp what it was like 200 years ago, right? I mean, to work and harvest, and I mean, an example would be the pioneers that populated United States and Canada, right? I mean, this is almost unimaginable to try and basically wrap your head around how difficult that would have actually been. Our modern conveniences have led to a state of prosperity, an unprecedented state of prosperity. But I think there's some wisdom lurking in there, because with that temptation, I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned.
Well, and just reflecting on, what is the standard count of a generation? Is it 25 years typically? A generation, Generation X, Y, Z, the millennials, all that stuff. Isn't it around 25 years?
I never quite really thought about it, but I think that's about right. I think maybe we have an artificially longer or overlapping sort of time frame with people because I think the average life expectancy in the United States is 76. And of course, we know that wasn't the case. So society would have, viewed their elders in quite a different way, right?
Yeah,
We
but I
almost,
think this generational thing has more to do with the average age of people bearing children, right? So
yeah,
another generation comes along at around 25 years. It used to be maybe a little less, maybe a little more now, but we're talking 7 generations since
yeah,
1844.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So it's beyond memory, right? Like it's beyond the experience of human memory. And so we're tasked as a civilization to try and pass that down in the form of wisdom. And from what I've read about this declaration of the Bob, I mean, it's nothing short of prophetic by definition. Isn't that right?
Well, thank you. Yeah, I would definitely go there, and let as you know that I'm going there big time. So let me contextualize this a little bit. For me, this seems much more recent because when I was studying theology as a young man, when I was the latest, greatest generation, when I was 19, 20, 21, I was the latest generation. When I was doing that, 1844 was well known to me because a man named William Miller had predicted that Jesus would return in 1844. And for us, that was a big deal, except it wasn't because we knew Jesus had not returned in 1844. What I mean by that is the following, is that we anticipated the arrival of Jesus at any moment practically because we saw the signs of the time of the end. To put it mildly, the fig tree, as Jesus said, was ripe and the fruit was falling off. For crying out loud, Israel had been established as a nation. And that doesn't happen prophetically until after Jesus returned. So something funky was going on. We knew it. And we were at risk of trying to set dates like William Miller had. William Miller set the date of 1844. Millions of people believed him. And it led to something called the Great Disappointment in the United States. But there was a fervor across the world. My friend Jay Tyson has written a couple of books called The Wise Men of the West. And he talks about, from a historical fiction perspective, how this fervor was going on in the UK and beyond. So it wasn't just William Miller either. And I was aware of this. So this was always almost top of mind for me. And it was a puzzle that I couldn't figure out. The Lord delays his coming. Where are thou, Jesus? Right? And why? How long are you going to let this madness go on before you return and begin fulfilling all of these prophecies that seem to be being fulfilled before our eyes? So I didn't grow up in that sense with the feeling that this was distant past. It was current and relevant to me. So when many years later, I learned about this declaration and its correlation to the first telegraph message, and that it happened in 1844, it got my attention immediately. So to read another quote that we'll begin to talk about, this is from Baha'u'llah, the prophet founder of the Baha'i faith. He declared who he was in 1863. Now, there's a prophetic timeline involved here as well between 1844, 1853, and 1863. These prophetic timelines also correlate to specific days in the book of Daniel, which William Miller used to come up with 1844. So you've got this close proximity of dates, and there's some different ways of looking at it. My point in saying that is just to sort of contextualize who Baha'u'llah was. He was also, according to Baha'is, the Bab came talking about he whom God will make manifest, he who would come shortly after himself. In the eyes of Baha'is, in that sense, the Bab is a little bit like John the Baptist, and Baha'u'llah is a little bit like Jesus, because John the Baptist predicted that one would come after him whom he was not worthy to tie his sandals, or to put on his sandals. Anyway, the point is, here's the quote from Baha'u'llah: "Say, in the east the light of his revelation hath broken. In the west have appeared the signs of his dominion." These prophetic words from Baha'u'llah encapsulate those extraordinary events of 1844, a year in which the spiritual and material paths of humankind converged in remarkable ways. So the Bab in Iran, Persia, is announcing that he is the promised one. He is the Mahdi. He's the 12th Imam. And in the West, Samuel Morse is issuing this first telegraph message, later defined by Lincoln as a lightning message. We'll get to that later, which traveled like lightning and brought the message, "What hath God wrought?" Straight out of Numbers 23:23, a very prophetic passage. So, as David Bowie sang in one of his songs, something good is happening, but I don't know what it is, right? So you had this great disappointment. You had millions of people anticipating that Jesus would return by May 21st, 1844. You can't get any closer in proximity than that. And then this telegraph message is released on May 24th, 24 hours after the Bab declares on May 23rd, which, as it's the evening of May 22nd, sunset, is the first day comes, that date comes, the next day comes the Bab's message, the next day comes the telegraph message. So I'll stop there. So yes, to your point, it's prophetic.
I was going to bring this up, but I say, could you elaborate a little bit about that opening sentence? Say, in the East, the light of his revolution hath broken. In the West has appeared the signs of his dominion. Like, I really focus on this dominion because there's an acknowledgement that there's something different about the West. And I, made a note about uncharted territory, right? I mean, where is our uncharted territory? Our
to give a little background, people who have watched this show for a while know that I often refer to this little symbol. I'm pointing to the sun and the moon behind me, because in Genesis it says that God put the greater and lesser lights in heaven to rule the day and rule the night. There is your first mention of dominion, right? And we as a species were given sovereignty on this plane of existence, this material plane of existence, as referenced by the earth. And this, if you put the sun and the moon in heaven, then by definition, later when the Tower of Babel happened, which coincidentally, Bab means gate, and Bab El means the gate of God. in the Akkadian language, Nimrod founded a city called Bab El, the gate of God, and built a tower to heaven, or tried to, and God called it confusion. That's what caught my original interest about the Bab. The point is, Nimrod was asserting his dominion and wanted to extend that dominion up to heaven, and God said, no. Those are the boundaries, those are the barriers of your dominion. So when we start talking about dominion, those were the first references, right? So here also, the sun and the moon, you've got the east and the west. You've got the shining of the sun and the reflection coming back from the east. So in the west, we've got materialism, which then takes the energy of the revelation and does something with it materially, right? Of course, we should acknowledge the source and submit to the source, the light, versus creating a Frankenstein monster, which, when was that book written? By Mary Shelley? Kind of a symbol of the technological age. That's also sort of a lodestone that goes along with this whole conversation. But now, to get more specifically to your point about dominion, here's my favorite example that I believe illustrates this. The sun of divine revelation appears on the horizon periodically, right? When Adam was in the Garden of Eden, and then darkness came, and then you had Noah who came, and then you had Abraham, and then you had Moses. And at these, when things got bad, then you would have this messenger come. The Bible would say a manifestation of God who would come and bring the light back and shed light on everything. Jesus being a prime example. He said, I am the light, I am the way. So that, I forgot exactly where I was going with this. None of these manifestations of God solved the problem that happens when we deviate from the light. When we move away from the light, we lose our dominion. What's the opposite of sovereignty? Enslavement, right? We become enslaved. It started with Cain. He said, sin lies at the door and its desire is to you, but you must rule over it. You must exercise dominion over your passions and the sin that will otherwise entrap you and ultimately enslave you in addiction, in darkness, in a hellish existence in which you kill your brother and you have to live with that. Right? So when we deviate from the light, we lose our dominion, and every manifestation of God only ever regulated that. Even Jesus, who came and shed his blood for the forgiveness of sin, who later attained such sovereignty after his resurrection, if you will, that every king bowed to his name and was crowned in his name. He had that sovereignty. He still regulated slavery. He did not abolish it. Why? Because we weren't ready as a society and as a people to fully solve this problem. You were going to have some form of indentured servitude. You were going to have people who are losing the capacity to take care of themselves and were going to become beholden to somebody else. And society did not yet have the maturity, the capacity to not have people fall into some form of indentured servitude. Even today, we're struggling with student loan debt, right? Which is one aspect of that. It's not exactly slavery, but the system is enslaving people in a number of ways.
Be careful not to backslide on freedom is what you're really saying. Like this, we have to be defenders of and liberators of freedom and watch for that tendency for enslavement, because it's a natural byproduct of our
human existence, of failure. You know, today we want to regulate equality of outcomes through social justice, right? That is not God's project. He does not want to regulate and enforce equality of outcomes. He wants to fully provide equality of opportunity. But as we know, baggage and circumstances don't really provide equality of opportunity. It's fascinating when you go back to the laws of Moses and the Jubilee year, where there was a level setting. We talked about generations, right? 50 years, 2 generations later, if your grandfather really screwed up and lost everything and had nothing to give you, no inheritance, lost even the land that was given to him by God, the land reverted to the families in the Jubilee year. So the grandchildren would get the land back and have a new opportunity. Sadly, they might not have the skills, the training. They might have come from poverty and other kinds of enslavement. They might have once again lost it. But you, at least with that, you would have this new opportunity, this fresh opportunity every 50 years, right? So, but my point in this is more specific. The Bob himself had servants. And when he died, he still had those servants. Just like George Washington, who had slaves. And when he died, he freed those slaves before the Bob declared. This is real. This is history. Here on American soil, our first president had slaves. And it was okay, according to Jesus, because it was regulated. He was supposed to treat his slaves according to the principles of the Bible, but he was allowed by the Bible to have them. You follow me? And so did the Bob. But Baha'u'llah brought a new era in 1863 when he declared who he was. He declared that slavery was now abolished. It was no longer allowed. And my point in this is that was the revelation, the new revelation from the East. And instantly, the United States sprang into action, and President Lincoln used that very same invention, the telegraph, that had sent that first message in 1844. He called them lightning messages, and he said he used lightning messages to communicate with his generals and to prosecute the Civil War beginning in 1863. To do what? To abolish slavery on this continent. For me, your mileage may vary, but for me, that is proof that the revelation appeared in the East and the signs of his dominion appeared in the West, because the West carried out his wishes. And Baha'u'llah praised the great Republic of the West, as did his son Abdul Baha, and said America would lead the world to the most great peace. And there's your sign, there's your evidence of that submission, knowingly or unknowingly. And America is praised for that, and advice is given on how to solve the problem of race relations as a result of that war, in which African Americans are told to be grateful to the whites of America for doing that. And the whites of America are to love their fellow African Americans. And Abdu'l-Baha said that you have so much in common. The races in America have so much in common. You have one country, one citizenship, one religion, he said, the Christian religion, the Christian faith. And he said one patriotism. So submission to the light would be to follow that advice and that guidance as a way out of the ongoing festering problem of race relations in this country. So for me, these are proofs. And thank you for asking that question. We're going to go to a quick commercial break. This is being pre-recorded. I don't think we mentioned that. We got to keep it to short segments so that they can be uploaded. When we come back, we'll proceed to talk more about the transformation that came into effect as a result of this declaration in the East and the effects, the signs of the dominion that appeared in the West as evidenced by the telegraph message. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with a special Holy Day episode on the Declaration of the Bob.
In a world where beliefs are tested and mysteries unfold, one book takes you on a journey of prophecy, faith, and the unexpected. Followers of William Miller held their breath as they awaited the prophesied second coming of Jesus in 1844. But when the advent didn't unfold as expected, the great disappointment swept across the land. However, what if the story didn't end there? What if the Spirit of Christ did return in 1844 in the Middle East? Dive into the prophecies of Daniel, where the past and present converge to reveal a hidden truth. Embark on a captivating journey where the threads of history and belief intertwine in ways you could never imagine. 1844, Convergence in Prophecy, a meticulously researched and documented exploration, unfolds like a mystery, captivating and engaging. A must-read for those who seek to understand our world's intricate tapestry of religions and their surprising unity. Are you ready to challenge your perceptions and uncover the hidden truths of our times? Embark on a journey that speaks to the heart of today's challenges and offers hope from the most unexpected source. 1844, Convergence in Prophecy. Dare to explore. Dare to believe.
Welcome back to the second episode, or rather installment in this special Holy Day episode. We're here with Dan Sanderson in the studio. We're talking about the signs of God's dominion, or the signs of God's revelation appearing in the East and his dominion in the West, as evidenced by the Declaration of the Bob in 1844 and Baha'u'llah in 1863. Right before the break, we were talking about America fighting a civil war to abolish slavery. And Dan, I know that was a topic that intrigued you as a philosopher, a student of Plato and Socrates, and the project of philosophy to advance the fortunes of our species. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, Wade, you brought up this earlier about Jesus having slaves and the
Jesus did not have slaves.
Oh, Jesus did not have slaves. Okay.
No, but the Bob had servants, aka slaves, as did Baha'u'llah, by the way. But Baha'u'llah freed his slaves.
But I think, was there a point that you were making that Jesus kind of tried to show sympathy and love, regulated it, right? Yeah.
So I'll just give a quick example. I've shared this before, but this famous statement, turn the other cheek.
Yeah.
If they strike you on your left cheek, turn the other cheek. The reason there's Jewish law behind this. A master had the right to backhand a servant.
Mm-hmm.
So what Jesus was alluding to, if they backhand you, turn the other cheek, let them hit you on the other cheek. But Jewish law said if he hauls off and were to hit you, you'd have him by the short hairs. You could take him to court. So it empowered the slaves
Mhm.
within the law
Mhm.
to hold their masters accountable through submission. It's brilliant. It's unbelievably brilliant how Jesus, the master, used the law correctly, and his adversaries, the Pharisees, used the law incorrectly.
Yeah, very interesting. Yeah, no, he's amazing. He's a singularity in history for sure. Okay, so my point really was about that transition in human history where we emerge out of a dark age of slavery, where we enslave our fellow brothers and sisters. Okay, and
Which, of
there's
course, goes back to Cain and Abel, right? And, hey, Cain, where's your brother Abel? And Cain's response, what am I, my brother's keeper? And God had to say, well, his blood is crying to me from the earth.
yeah, and we were talking about this the other day, and you jumped in and said, yes, you are your fellow man's keeper, right? And that's
Yep.
the pathway to, I don't know if it's the pathway to heaven on earth, but I mean, it's here for everybody to access to. And that's very powerful. I mean, I'm not a slave, but I mean, you feel that instant sort of tapping into an energy or a power that, is I think what powers the belief in faith, right? And anyway, so what I'd like to talk about and hover on for a minute is that point where knowledge becomes accessible to all of humankind. We now cannot not know that slavery is, right? Like, we've kind of hit that, right? And it's now we know. And so anything that slides back into that is, comes with like a steeper grade of judgment,
Yep.
right? I mean,
yeah, and again, it goes back to this whole, the greater and lesser lights in heaven. And when the sun is at its zenith, things are blindingly clear. But then Moses comes down from the mountain and the people say, oh, I don't like the fact that your face is shining from the presence of God. They don't even like the reflected light. And they say, put a veil over that face, because their deeds are evil, it says in the Bible. So in the nighttime, you still have light, you can still move, discern, you can think you're making progress and whatever, but you don't see things clearly.
Interesting.
And so to your point, what this new revelation has shed new additional light, and it's undeniable, and everyone recognizes it. They may still resist it, they may still fight it, there may be pockets of darkness, but overall, the world has entered a new era.
Yes, that was my point. And to meditate on Revelation for a minute, the etymology of it means like to reveal. We get that, but to uncover and lay bare. And so, even in the wisdom of somebody who's got secular tendencies, like I openly admit, and please do judge me for that. The thing is that it actually is kind of poetic. That's the way I'm kind of processing it, because in Plato's philosophy, he relies on memory and what it feels like to remember something. And so now all of civilization from east to west now knows implicitly that slavery is wrong. And so trying to justify it is ignoble, ungodly, perverse, and evil. It's a very distinct line that has been drawn in the sand for people to step over. And so acknowledging that we're at a point in human history, and acknowledged with this transition in 1844, this is it's quite beautiful, right, to acknowledge it through that lens.
Well, and there were a couple of other major statements made at that time, especially by Baha'u'llah in 1863, the equality of the sexes. And also that there would be a federated world system in which the leaders would come together and agree and stop trying to solve their differences through war. And there would be the establishment of agreements international agreements by high-minded leaders that would then shape the form of governance for, I hate to use this word, for a new world order, right? To where humankind would come together and agree through wisdom, a word you like, through wisdom on what the boundaries should be, what the borders should be, what the limit of armaments should be. And these things were announced by Baha'u'llah when he was imprisoned in this deep, dark prison in outside of, I believe it's outside of Tehran, the Shia, getting the Persian name of it right and wrong right now, but in the darkest moment, darkest place in one of the darkest civilizations in the darkest history, came these new points of light that were not accepted back then. They were not accepted at all. To your point, there were still a couple of world wars ahead of us. The League of Nations and the United Nations, which is also still not there, still not fulfilling remotely the promise of that statue out in front of it about beating swords into plowshares. But the recognition is there, and it is a common human project of all peoples, all societies, to try to get there. And there are rogue nations, there are those still working against it, but increasingly they are pariahs, they are outcasts, because the consensus is overwhelmingly in favor of those principles that at the time they were delivered in 1844 were soundly rejected by the powers that be, especially in particular the Ottoman Empire that had control of the Holy Land. And this gets back to prophecy and the content of that first telegraph message. What hath God wrought? Samuel Morse's niece provided him that. But most people, even those who know about this telegraph message and its significance and its relationship to the Bab, have not necessarily dug in to find out what that verse really says, Numbers 23:23. It says, from this day it shall be said of Israel, there is no curse or divination against her. What hath God wrought? It's my personal opinion that what is signified by that, among other things, is the end of the times of the Gentiles. And indeed, we talked about William Miller, who was forced to give a date, and he told his followers sometime between May 21st, 1843 and May 21st, 1844. Why? Because he wasn't sure how God would count the year zero, right? He had the timeline from Daniel.
Oh, really? That's fascinating. Yeah, yeah.
But we had this human invention of the year zero. Well,
yeah,
it wasn't, the year zero wasn't well understood in Christianity. It took the Muslims and algebra to figure out the use of the year zero. And so from his perspective, he couldn't figure that out. So he gave himself, he hedged the bet.
The Greeks didn't know about it either.
That the date was really May 21st that he came up with. And it was the other 1843 or somewhere in between, because he wasn't sure how maybe God would split the difference of the year zero. But anyway, the point is, on May 21st, 1844, the Ottoman Empire issued one of several edicts that it was issuing that year, known as the Edicts of Toleration. And this particular edict told the British Empire, of all things, that they would stop the killing of people for religious reasons. For me, this signifies the removal of the boot, the Gentile boot that would trod down Jerusalem until the times of the Gentiles would be fulfilled, according to Jesus. And so there were other edicts of toleration in that year that also allowed the Jews not only to return, which they did always have the right to do, but to buy land. And so by 1914, there was a Jewish majority in Jerusalem because the Ottoman Empire had allowed them to begin to buy land. And subsequent to these edicts, we know that the British Empire got control of the Palestine Mandate. So it was completely delivered out of the hands of that Gentile entity, right? Now, well, you could also say that the British are Gentiles. That's a whole nother Oprah. I'm not going to get into it. There are some theories there as well, which I really won't get into, as to who they might be and the connection to Israel, the lost 10 tribes and all that stuff. But be that as it may, now there was a negotiation and a decision as to how the Jews would be allowed to return to that land and that territory that began around the time of World War I. And of course, we know the Jews were central to World War II. And if there's a World War III brewing right now, guess where it's brewing, right? The point is, in my view, that telegraph message elevated the end of the times of the Gentiles into our consciousness with a lightning message that was delivered a mere 24 hours after the Bab declared who he was in 1844.
Beautiful. Yeah, that's
Interestingly, Samuel Morse, who created this thing that enabled Lincoln to prosecute the civil war that ended slavery, got a patent from the Ottoman Empire because the Sultan, a few years after 1844, I think it was in the 50s where he got that patent, wanted himself to use this marvelous invention that made telecommunications possible instantaneously. So, interestingly, this ties also in directly to what Daniel said about in the time of the end, knowledge would increase and people would travel to and fro. And I got to make the point before we go to our next break that the book of Daniel was sealed, just like the book of Revelation, which had 7 seals. And Daniel went to God and said, what is this stuff you revealed to me? I don't get it. I don't understand. I don't know what this means. Tell me what this means. What am I writing down here? And God said, go thy way, Daniel. It's not for you. This book I'm giving you, it's not for you. In the time of the end, the wise will understand, knowledge will increase, and the wise will understand. That book, the seal of that book was also ripped off around that time, because that's why William Miller understood that the book pointed to 1844. And the wealth of revelation of that book, the book of Revelation, was, in my view, what had the whole world pregnant during the Enlightenment. Pregnant with possibility and opportunity and knowledge, and secrets were being unlocked through chemistry, biology, sociology. We then, in my view, were able to fulfill the promise of the gate of God, as Nimrod had aspired to, by putting a man on the moon and literally building a tower to heaven, because now the governor was off. As John Lennon sang around that time, the Beatles had a song they wrote that was played during the moon landing, or this universal telecast seen by millions. He said, there's nothing you can do that can't be done. And indeed, it was done now. The man landed on the moon, and he said, all you need is love, in that song. So just an amazing time of rejuvenation and celebration and growth and learning. Of course, not everything turned out positive. And we'll maybe talk a little bit about that when we come back from this break. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with more on the declaration of the Bab and the first telegraph message. Welcome back to the third segment, maybe the final segment. We'll see if Dan and I might be able to appear live in the studio at the end to engage with the audience comments of this pre-recorded version of the special Holy Day celebration of the Declaration of the Bab. Right before the break, we were really talking about the conjunction of the Bab's declaration, the telegraph message, and all the implications in technology and so on. And Dan, you had a question, I think, about that.
Revealing or releasing the seals. Like I was curious about what that actually meant, how many, and I mean that must have been monumental to have those revealed.
Well, it's more clear in the book of Revelation, where you literally have them numbered out, and it goes like pedantically through, and then the angel poured out the next vial, and then it ripped their vials and seals and the three woes, and it goes through them. And this is a lifetime study to understand the unsealing of the book of Revelation. The Germans have a phrase, das ist ein Buch mit sieben Siegel. Anything that's a mystery or hard to comprehend, that's a book with seven seals. And of course, they're referring to the book of Revelation. But the book of Daniel is very fascinating because it's twofold. Daniel predicted Jesus' first coming and his second coming. My pet philosophy there, or theory, is that when Daniel upstaged the Zoroastrian Magi in Nebuchadnezzar's court, when Nebuchadnezzar had this disturbing dream and wanted it interpreted, and he asked his astrologers, his Magi, the Zoroastrian priests, to help him. What did my dream? What is God trying to tell me? And they said, "Oh, king, tell us what you dreamt and we'll tell you the meaning." He's like, I'm not playing that game. You tell me what I dreamt and what it meant. "Oh, king, nobody can do this." And then Daniel came in and said, "No man can do that. They're right, but there's a God in heaven who can. And I'm here with that God." Right? So he upstaged them, and they got a hold of his book. And it's my fantasy that with Daniel's book, they studied it. And that's how because they are the wise men, the Magi from the East that appeared at Jesus's birth, are Zoroastrian wise men. So when God says in the time of the end, the wise will understand, that's a reference to his first coming, where the wise men, and by the way, my author friend Jay Tyson has written this book. I encourage everyone to get it. It's historical fiction, The Wise Men of the West. A whole lot of interesting, fun stuff about this. You can get this off of Amazon. You can reach out to me and we'll get you a special price on getting it to you. Wonderful book. You can get it through the Baha'i distribution service as well. He tells a historical fiction tale of how on Jesus's second coming, maybe there would be similar searches. But my point is, these wise men were able to use the information in the book of Daniel and their knowledge of astrology to chart the time and the place. In my view, this is how it happened. When it says they followed his star, it's because they were students of astrology and astronomy and the signs in heaven, which Daniel talks about. There will be signs in heaven, but Daniel gives a specific chronological timeline to pinpoint the time, and the signs in heaven help them triangulate the place, in my view. Regardless, it's clear they were wise enough to identify Jesus at his first coming. They were the only ones who did. Nobody else did, except for a few wise men from the East. In the time of the end, at Jesus' second coming, the same thing was going to happen, and that was William Miller and others, in my view. Others who even today see the signs unfolding around us, right? And I'm not going to go into who was and who wasn't, or might be actually Jesus at his return. We're really talking more specifically that in 1844, something important and dramatic happened that has transformed the world. So how does that work? Well, it's really the Enlightenment, isn't it? That somehow our species, our world, was infused with this unbelievable springtime rush of new knowledge and new understanding that all began in the decades that preceded 1844 and continued apace with the technological developments and this establishment of schools and universities, exactly fulfilling what Daniel said, that knowledge would increase and people would travel to and fro. Global travel, instant communications, connecting all the bright minds of this planet around the world. The Tower of Babel reassembled, learning one language and the diverse elements of humanity contributing to the advancement of the species.
Yeah. What can you say about Isaac Newton, or this compadre of this group of scientists like Galileo and Kepler?
Well, sadly, Galileo and Copernicus are an illustration of that darkness, right? The moon side of things, because when Jesus came, the sun, and brought the light, over time, the muddy feet of human beings trampling in the pure revelation and muddying up the light turned into something called the Dark Ages.
Interesting.
Right? Where it was the Catholic Church that was denying the advancement of science at that time. Not to pick on the Catholic Church. It's the natural order of things. You have a divine springtime, and then you have fall and winter.
Yeah. Well, I know they talk about the scientific revolution, and they refer to, and it's an arbitrary date. Like, what is the jumping off point? And it's a lot of times used as Isaac Newton's Principia Mathematica, 1687, right? I mean, Newton brought the light back. Do you view it as that? I mean, he just changed everything, right?
Well, I'm going to go poetic now, versus trying to identify a specific thing, and just say that Leonard Cohen, who I used in my books, there is a crack in everything. Yeah. That's how the light gets in. That's when it began to crack open, right? And once it began to crack open, and it's like that the dark moments before the dawn, right? The sun is not yet above the horizon, but the light is seen in the heavens and in the distance, and you begin, my roosters start crowing and waking me up before it's really light.
So what do you think about this? Like, I've used this term before called Newton envy, and he was so transformative in the world, right? He was a real, I mean, he's buried in Westminster Abbey. But then you would have people like Immanuel Kant that tried to systematize philosophy, right? They kind of took the, not the ethics out of it, they tried to kind of systematize it. And a better example would be Karl Marx, right? Who tried to,
yikes.
Yeah, exactly, right? So he tried to systematize sociology, right? And so that's why I come up with this heuristic of Newton envy, right? And look at the fallout to, I mean, with the light comes the darkness, I guess, if you want to use a metaphor, right?
So, well, yeah. So I guess the thing is here, it's the in my view, it's hubris, right? And in the book of Revelation, we have the messages to the churches. This is really how it starts out. We talked about how it gets unsealed, the various seals and whatnot. But in chapters 2 and 3 of the book of Revelation, we have this mail route, which goes through Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamus, Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, Laodicea. I might have gotten order of one of them mixed up. This mail route, and Paul uses, this is used by John, or Jesus reveals to John, in my opinion, a prophetic timeline of how the church would evolve. And you come to the end of the mail route and you have Laodicea, a church that is greatly and richly increased in knowledge, and knows it. And it says, yet you do not know that you're miserable, blind, and naked. And I will spew you out of my mouth because you're lukewarm. They were so rich that they took it for granted. They were spoiled, and they didn't recognize sort of the divine nature of it, right? And with the Enlightenment came materialism and the rejection of God, and Nietzsche's God is dead, right? We don't really need him anymore. We've evolved beyond him, or whatever it was that Nietzsche was really trying to say. I'm not going to claim to understand it. And I'm not going to demonize him. He simply marks a point. We've outgrown our use for God, and society ran headlong off that cliff. And then you had a dystopian vision called communism, right? In which property rights and ownership would go away in favor of some vague altruistic sentiment that would overcome us all. In John Lennon's, imagine no possessions, it's easy if you try. Whereas the revelation of every manifestation of God, including Baha'u'llah, would tell you that reward and punishment are the very foundations of civilization. And the ability to obtain an improved outcome through hard work, or to suffer through the lack of it.
Mm-hmm.
You follow me? To obtain an improved outcome through application of spiritual principles, or to suffer from the lack of it, to achieve heaven or nirvana or Valhalla versus the fires of hell.
Mm-hmm.
This is the basis of civilization, to hold oneself accountable to a higher power, and that there will be a judgment for everything you do. Communism wants to deny any and all of that, and look what it led to.
Yeah, I want to.
And by that, I got to make this point, because you've got these divided people, but communism brought the greatest horrors and atrocities on this planet, with Pol Pot, with even well-intentioned centralized planning in China that led to millions dying of starvation, because the functionaries didn't want to report up bad news about the harvest prospects. So the centralized planning that took control and power away from the individual in favor of some techno bureaucrat planning, right, led to unmitigated disaster.
Yeah, it's interesting, because I did read a book that compared the two, and really in relation from one to the other, we say communism versus capitalism, kinda. I'm just using that for an example, but clearly there was one winner, and in that particular time period. And when you look at the example of communism versus capitalism, it's clear that the communist project, or the book I read, its main thesis was really that it had to do with the speed of technology. And I think that nicely kind of brings it back down, or back to the lightning rod effect of technology that travels across the world, and trying to go back to something that is really at a fraction of the speed. I mean, that was the theory of the book. It was like, it had to do with the speed of the information flow, right? The information flow from a centralized planning versus other parts of the world, or other economic systems, other ways that and you could say economics, organization of people, resources, and activity, right? Okay. So, one clearly dominates over the other, and forever has the world changed, because that type of thing, unless it has a fast delivery method, is prone to fall over. One thing I wanted to, bring back, because you mentioned Nietzsche, it was interesting. Do you know an artist named Duchamp?
The name is familiar, yeah.
It seems to be like your generation, right? I don't know if I'm catching up to your generation, or you just keep moving away, but it seems Anyway, so there's this idea.
Sign the papers, old man. Sign the papers.
The interesting thing about like the postmodern sort of thinkers that emerged in your generation, like the Sartre, the existentialists, all these kinds of things. Well, there's one artist, Duchamp, who would do something like take a funnel and sign it and say that's art, this kind of thing. And so I always kind of equate Nietzsche to somebody that I give him credit where credit's due. He's a brilliant man. He was very poetic, but in terms of the path dependence, the trajectory of wisdom that he was on, he falls short. He's kind of like a Duchamp on the wall, which means he would take this urinal and he would put it on the wall and he would install it in an art gallery. We would call that art, to challenge our ideas of art. So once you get past the small little novelty that checks the traditions of thousands of years, you can go, okay, great, thank you for that reminder, but let's get back to business. That's kind of how I process it. Just so you know, because I think it does a disservice when the narrative goes back into a God is dead sort of scenario, when it's like we don't. His whole project is corrupt, really. Right.
Well, but I think this is actually a really great point to sort of bring this home and land it. And that is, because I hear what you're saying and I 100% agree with you, right? It's like the squirrel effect or the shiny object to distract us away from what's real. You know, our common friend, Joe Atman, right? And his book where he posits that consciousness allows us to create false gods and idols that cause us to interact with our concepts in our head rather than the reality itself. And so the reality itself is what bears repeated investigation. You know, it's a mine that can always be mined for more riches, right? Then you have the golden calf that you can dance around, the distraction, right? And so to conclude, I'm just going to ask the audience to more deeply investigate this topic of the Bob's Declaration and the first telegraph message. Is it a gimmick? Is it, you know, am I here to cobble together this interesting coincidence and make a mountain out of a molehill? Or is Eileen Maddox, another author, onto something when she writes this little book, 1844, Convergence in Prophecy, the Convergence of Prophecy for Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and the Baha'i Faith. This book will allow you to investigate the prophetic aspect a little deeper to find out that indeed the Jewish scriptures, if you will, the Torah and the law, the prophets, and the writings of the Jewish faith, in addition to the Christian writings, in addition to the Quran and the Baha'i writings, all point to this. There is a there. It's not a gimmick. It's not a urinal on a wall called art. But that's up to you to investigate, because you want to know what the very first principle of the Baha'i faith is? It's the independent investigation of reality. Put that in your pipe, Joe Atman, and smoke it, right? So it's a wonderful call to see things with your own eyes and not through the eyes of another. And it says if you focus on justice as that really is, which is interesting, an interesting lens, God will confide in you. I submit the question of 1844 as well as 1948, the establishment of the State of Israel, the simultaneous establishment of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Matthew 25, where it says, when the Son of Man comes in his glory, he will judge the nations. And per Matthew, he will judge them according to how they judge themselves. And others, however you judge others, that's how I will judge you. All of this swirl of inputs comes down to these points. And if you investigate these things with an open mind, you might find that it will transform your world in the way that the world was transformed through the Enlightenment and the events of 1844, 1863, and beyond. We're going to go to a break here after I give Dan the last word on this segment. And when we come back, if we come back, there might be some interaction with audience comments. I'm not a prophet. I can't prophesy what's going to happen tomorrow night. We had to pre-record this because my son has a baseball game, which I'm not going to miss that, because as a father, that's the most important for me. But Dan will be in the studio to run these segments, and he and or I and or both of us will be there to interact with the audience comments. Dan, over to you for the last word of this segment.
Yeah, Wade, you do that. It's kind of funny because I'm listening to it. It was so well wrapped up. I was thinking the words that should be said is well said, you know, and then I feel like maybe I can lean on that namesake of Daniel and go, hey, I don't know what I'm listening to, but I'm sure it's the truth.
Daniel, the episode is sealed, but there's some wise men out there who will understand this mess that we've created.
Yeah.
I didn't make that connection. Coincidence? Maybe. With that, we'll go to the break, and maybe we'll be back. Don't go anywhere, because there might be something that will come right after this. See you soon.
In a world where beliefs are tested and mysteries unfold, one book takes you on a journey of prophecy, faith, and the unexpected. Followers of William Miller held their breath as they awaited the prophesied second coming of Jesus in 1844. But when the advent didn't unfold as expected, the great disappointment swept across the land. However, what if the story didn't end there? What if the Spirit of Christ did return in 1844 in the Middle East? Dive into the prophecies of Daniel, where the past and present converge to reveal a hidden truth. Embark on a captivating journey where the threads of history and belief intertwine in ways you could never imagine. 1844, Convergence in Prophecy, a meticulously researched and documented exploration, unfolds like a mystery, captivating and engaging. A must-read for those who seek to understand our world's intricate tapestry of religions and their surprising unity. Are you ready to challenge your perceptions and uncover the hidden truths of our times? Embark on a journey that speaks to the heart of today's challenges and offers hope from the most unexpected source. 1844, Convergence in Prophecy. Dare to explore. Dare to believe.
And
We felt like we
revealed.
had to show that video twice because it was so perfectly attuned to the topic of the show. And indeed, Dan and I are here live. So in watching this pre-recorded episode, I want to highlight a couple of things before we go to the audience comments. And the time marches on. I got to put my glasses on to see my scribbled note here. Oh, yes. So in this idea of progressive revelation, in which we had Adam, Noah, Abraham, Moses, Jesus, Muhammad, and others who are not necessarily mentioned in the Bible, who periodically bring fresh light and new insights when we as a people go astray, when we as Adam and Eve take the forbidden fruit and then try to figure it out on our own through the school of hard knocks and really muddy things up. When those new manifestations come and shed the light that's needed, it's like the gentle dawn. The light begins to emerge. It's like springtime where we begin to have warmth. Then we have an explosion of life. With God, everything's perfect, but we're given free will, so we do mess things up. The idea, however, is to build up layer upon layer through the forces of integration. And this is the key point I'm making right now. To integrate the past with the future. It's revelation, not revolution. Meanwhile, forces of destruction, forces of disintegration, entropy are also at play. And we can align ourselves with either the forces of integration or the forces of disintegration. When the revelation appears in the East and the dominion appears in the West and the material application of those teachings begins to happen, it must be a union of religion and science. It cannot be a tug of war. It cannot devolve into materialism. The effort to eliminate extremes of wealth and poverty, which are part of the revelation of the Bab and what Baha'u'llah then came to do, cannot devolve into communism. We had a comment about communism in the chat. The reason is communism is a false god. It attempts to achieve this without God, without divine law. It seeks to upend the divine order of things, to remove the basic principle of reward and punishment. It doesn't seek to equalize things in the right way or with the right method. And history has shown us that it doesn't work. Now, there are excesses in capitalism as well, of course. I'm not saying that, capitalist countries have it all right and communist countries have it all wrong. There's neither side is purely this or purely that. We as a species are trying to figure it out to the best of our abilities. But this key is the forces of integration and the divine springtime that came with the declaration of the Bab, the power of his writings. He's called the primal point around whom all things revolve. It was a short, brilliant flash of light that was dramatic. The subsequent arrival of he whom God would make manifest, whom the Bab talked about, is a long-term play, which has that same challenge that every religion has had of getting it right. And it doesn't end with the Bab or Baha'u'llah. Successive manifestations will be needed because we won't get it all right. Course corrections will always be needed. Unity, love, kindness, all the fruits of the Spirit need to be brought to bear to integrate the various forces, to stop the division, to stop the rancor, to stop the people from contending with each other, to stop Cain from killing Abel, or casting our brothers into hell theologically or ideologically. So I wanted to emphasize the forces of integration. And the Bab came with that power to unite humankind. He predicted one language. Thus the reference at the beginning of this session to the Tower of Babel and the city that Nimrod built, and what God called confusion at the time because it wasn't being done the right way. Are we mature enough today to do it the right way? That is the question. The arc of moral progress, which was one of the questions that was brought up, is in our favor. But that doesn't mean it's a downhill cakewalk. I wanted to add those comments in here to emphasize the power, the opportunity, but also the challenge of living up to what the Bab did when he came and declared who he was, and that dominion unfolded on the other side of the world through the technological advancements and the application of laws like the abolition of slavery. So, Dan, I'll stop there and allow you to.
I had to put this up. It's just it is great. I don't think there's going to be any end except for the one God brings. And you hear this, the ends in itself, and that's a nice, great comment. One of the things you brought up earlier too was, and I tried to remember it, and then Chloe brought it up actually in the comments. It was your comment about truth is reality and stop. So what is your definition of truth? Reality. What's reality, truth? I know it's circular, it's a tautology, but it sure feels good to talk about, right?
Well, no, that's an interesting point because there are two revelations. There's the revealed word, and then there's the effect of the word. The creation, God said, let there be light. And there was light, right? So there's the revelation, there should be light, says God, there should be light, and then there was light. The creation itself is the greatest revelation. That's one of the reasons my family and I are involved in agriculture, raised bed gardening, companion planting, and increasingly regenerative farming. We're created from the dust of the ground, but we're to become, and then God breathed in us life. The soil is alive. In a cubic foot of soil, there's as many organisms as there are stars in our solar system in 1 cubic foot of soil. Soil is vibrant and alive. In the desert, it's just dead dust. We're turning our soil into dead dust, which has to be tilled with chemicals, and food is grown with chemicals to approximate some kind of food that is more like a Frankenstein monster. But when we teach young teenagers what it means to get their hands in that soil and plant and have the patience to see it grow and have to tend and water it day after day, that grounds them in reality in a way that this does not.
That's right.
They can spend all their time, with their fingers on this, nice, clean, slick, exotic, fascinating, engaging, bells and whistles, clicks and whirs, addictive, totally unreal in a sense. And the destruction of the planet to create this and put it in everybody's hands and empower it, and also draw people away from reality into a fantasy world of games and whatever, and bad things too, which I won't mention by name. But reality, nature reveals God. The heavens, it says, declare God's glory. The heavens declare God's glory. The creation is the greatest revelation. And when you engage with it, you're forced to confront reality. You jump off a building, you're going to die. You walk out in the desert without water, you're going to die. You walk out in, Alaska without clothes, you're going to die. Reality will impose itself on you no matter what you profess to believe in terms of your religion or your ideology. The creation itself is God's revelation, and it teaches us. And this answers one of the questions that was in here too about progressive revelation. And I put a couple things in the comments about how it's cyclical, right? Day follows night, night follows day. Winter follows summer, spring follows winter. That's the cycles. And I was thinking earlier, the forces of integration, it's like the topsoil in America was like 20 feet deep in places because of just the layers, the year after year of grass growing and animals eating it and fertilizing the land. And the rain and the water and the sun over time gradually created this rich 20 feet of topsoil, which was blown away in the Dust Bowl.
Yeah.
Right? And that's kind of a metaphor for the richness of God's way of doing things and our ability to screw it up.
You need discernment. Monocrops are bad. That's what I mean. The alignment is actually there. I said, we know that I'm a tree hugger, right? I mean, I'm on the Pacific coast. I like hugging trees. Hey, I came from Alberta, so it's from the little version of Texas all the way over to environmentalism. But the thing is that you and I are closer and more closely aligned than people may think. It's like I said, well, I don't know, wait for the conservative movement to finally adopt an environmental step, and I'm not saying you're conservative. I'm saying, like, I'm waiting for that voice to have it hit reality, because I mean, that's what we need. That's the antidote to, all the overreach and the sacrifice of freedom in the sake of God only knows. Who knows? Right?
Yep. So allow me to address this one comment from Peace on Earth. I don't care what the name of the system is. And this was when we were talking about communism. But I believe in people doing the work having access to the expletive deleted company profit, so that workers aren't alienated from the results of their labor. So I have experience in business. I was a minister, resigned from the ministry, and went to separate my faith from my paycheck because of the inherent challenges in that relationship. Jesus said you cannot serve God and mammon, right? You can't be spiritual and material at the same time. And this really gets to this need for integration, right? And we have some shows coming up on the created image of God that will address this. But my point is, I kind of zigged and zagged, right? Maybe I learned from one ditch to the other by going from the nonprofit ministry preacher world into the technology big business world. I ended up working for a company called Deloitte Consulting, management consultants. My bill rate was $550 an hour to help some of the largest corporations in America and the world maximize their profits. And what I did was I was in a group called Strategy and Operations, in which we examined the business you were in and the processes that were needed to be successful in that business, and how to structure your company around people, process, and systems. This thing that you're saying here, I would agree with, and everyone agrees with, and even the greediest for-profit company agrees with this. They're smart people. They know that if the workers for the company don't share in the profits, the company will not succeed. They know in the world of capitalism that people have options and they can go to your competitor. If you're a big bank and you're miserly in the way you compensate people, they'll go across the street and work for your competitor. That's the whole point, is to give people options, freedom of choice. So there's this oversimplified fantasy view. And when we start using words like capitalism and communism and socialism, these are oversimplified sound bites. Einstein said things should be made as simple as they can be, no simpler. I love this quote.
That's a primal quote. That's the method of Plato's philosophy. I don't know if you knew that.
That's
because
awesome.
Now,
so I want to talk about this for a moment. And there's a book. It's called Maverick. You should go, Peace on Earth. You should go get this book called Maverick. You can find it, and I believe it's in Argentina, where there was an experiment, kind of a more socialist model, in which this person was trying to build the company in this manner where the employees shared in the profits. Well, guess what? In capitalism, that's called stock options, right? That's how that's done. You follow me? Because the company is complex and it has to manage. Your body is complex. You have blood pumping through the heart to get oxygenated. And it's very complicated. There are lots of illnesses that come. For some reason, my camera just went blurry.
Just as you're talking about illnesses and pumping blood, you just go.
Right. So that was really. So this is an important point. Let me try one more time because this is really bothering me. Oh well, I will just be blurry. So
I will be blurry.
There you go. So my point is this: in a business, in a big corporation, money is the blood.
Yeah.
And it's complicated to get it right. Your cash flow, the capital that you need to invest in research and development, the compensation pay structures to keep top talent and the best talent, and to adequately reward people for jobs that take 20 years of school and study versus jobs that you can get when you come out of high school.
Yeah.
And everyone likes to complain, right? But there's this wonderful thing called the 10th commandment that balances and regulates all of this. The 10th commandment says, thou shalt not covet. And it goes into detail and says, you shall not covet your neighbor's wife, your neighbor's house, your neighbor's horse, donkey, cow, or anything that is your neighbor's. Mm-hmm. And materialism leads, and Paul the apostle in Corinthians says, do not compare yourselves to each other. You are not wise in doing so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So to look around at what somebody has and somebody else doesn't have, that's covetousness. To want what somebody else has is covetousness. And in a well-functioning system, you have options. There are rewards and punishments built into it. If you eat too much junk, you're going to have a heart attack. If your business is poorly run, it's going to fail. Mm-hmm. And everybody's going to lose money. If the government gets too involved in regulation, it skews things and it doesn't work. I was in the Soviet Union and I saw the bread lines, right? Because centralized planning and the idea of communism does not work. And meanwhile, across the border, the supermarkets were stock full of anything you could possibly imagine. I have a dear friend who came from East Germany, and I wasn't there when this happened. This was before my time, but she came out while the Soviet Union was at its height. I think in the 60s she was able to, or 70s she was able to emigrate and get married to a West German. I spent 10 years in Germany. When she went to the supermarket, she stood frozen in the aisle, frozen with indecision because she had so many choices. She didn't know how to choose which soap, because in the Soviet Union there was only one soap, if there was any. If there was any, you grabbed what was there. She stood frozen like a deer in headlights and literally started crying, overwhelmed by the abundance and the choices.
Yeah.
So when we start ranting and railing against things, right?
Be careful what you wish for.
Well, yeah, be careful what you wish for. So what we do know from history is that communism doesn't work. And why doesn't it work? Because the principle of ownership is enshrined in creation. We were given dominion. We were given free will. We are to, ownership is maybe not the right term. Stewardship is a better term. But God granted land under Moses to be in the families in perpetuity so that you would have land. But you would die on that land if you didn't farm it. You would be a rich, evil landowner dying because you didn't plant your crops with your own sweat and blood, right? There's a proverb that says some people are, the sluggard is so lazy he cannot bring the spoon from the bowl to his mouth. So God is interested in equal opportunity, not regulating equal outcomes. Figuring all this out. There is so much in all the divine writings. And again, this is why Jesus regulated slavery. Because people fall into indentured servitude. But at this point in humanity's evolution, we should have gotten it right enough that the standard has been raised. At this point in time, society should deliver the ability to not have slavery. And guess what? In America, we don't. No matter what you say, you can say you're a slave to the government. But you elected that government.
Yeah. No, America's still the shiny, I was going to say object, but that wasn't right. There's still the shiny something on the hill, right? I mean, it's still the ideal, the aspiration. So many millions, billions perhaps, of people would just love a chance to have a crack at an American citizenship.
So thank you, Peace on Earth, for saying this. No company in the world adequately rewards people. I'm just going to ask you to pause and think about that. Have you ever tried to build a company?
Wait, let me ask you. Look at this.
I want to make this point. Think about, people do 100% work and get crumbs. Is that really objectively true? There are companies that have made any and everyone who was there at the beginning fabulously wealthy. And they have later employed thousands, tens of thousands of people and elevated them to the middle class with untold riches compared to any type of system of the past. Yeah. So this is a lopsided, unrealistic perspective to say no company in the world adequately rewards people.
They give the opportunity.
Over to you, because
they give the opportunity, like you're saying. No, but it's really interesting because right after her original comment, it says, Daniel Fletcher says, "Hey Joe, where you at, man?" That's not the one, but I thought that was so clever. Anyways, there is this Ella Montgomery says, let's throw that one up. And it's saying, peace on earth, so go and do it. Make a profit and share it with everybody. Just go ahead.
Well, the answer might be, I
Go do
can't
it.
because the system is rigged against me.
That's right. So who's going to, and then you actually
Right?
step back and say, who's elevating in the system?
So this, how about workers, their dominion? You have the right to walk across the street and get another job. But what I'm hearing is there is no job. Because
You're forced to do that. Yeah.
these evil employers and owners are enslaving me. Well, then go become an employer and an owner and do it differently. And you will find out that your judgment of them is unfair.
Mhm.
Jesus said, according to your standard of judgment, that is how you will be judged. And he gave parables about servants and what they did with talents they were given. So, right, this is
Talents
a deep
or money. Talents or money. It's currency, right? Yeah.
Even you could imagine talents to be your abilities, your capabilities, your gifts, whether you have artistic bent or intelligence, or you're hardworking, or you've got strong DNA, you have a long life. Maybe you can live to be 90 and work till you're 70, and you can get a little edge that way by putting a little bit more away. You know what I mean? Whatever.
Exactly. Yeah.
So
you work to your strengths.
Right.
And this is why we also form relationships, and
I don't want to just squelch where this is coming from. There is a lot of unfairness in the world, but you know what I teach my son? I don't teach my children that the world is rigged against them and they can't succeed and they can't win. That is a guaranteed recipe for misery. And what I try to teach my son is life is not fair, and that is fair. Mm-hmm. You must overcome it. Traditionally we were taught if your teacher doesn't like you, you just have to work twice as hard. Mm-hmm. Right? So whatever bias, whatever resistance, whatever challenge, it's your responsibility before God to overcome it. Those are called tests and trials traditionally. Sorry, that's like
there are guardrails. There are guardrails in the law that protect, but we give up some freedoms, but we all agree with those, and we all surrender ourselves to the law, right?
Jesus said, "You shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free." Mm-hmm. Right? The writings of the Bob.
Getting back to the Bob. Getting back to the Bob.
He says, in this day, mm-hmm. only deeds of stainless purity will be accepted before God. So ultimately, if the owner of a company, and there are many of them, and I know many of them, really have at their heart to create a company that is the best on the planet, which in their eyes does not mean the most profitable, but provides the most opportunity and is the most fun place to work and the most rewarding place to work, and seeks to balance the pricing of its products with the market and all the challenges that come from running a successful business. They are sincerely doing everything they can to help
that razor's edge. Yeah.
They might even err on the side of being too generous once they have it made, once they're successful, right? So, but the point is, I'm kind of losing my thread here, I guess. But there are many company owners who are really trying to do this in the right way. And, to sort of make these sweeping judgmental statements against them is, in my view, I was quoting the Bob, only deeds of stainless purity will be accepted before God in this day, right? Mm-hmm. The motives must be pure. Mm-hmm. And God is the judge of all that ultimately. And Jesus said, yeah, don't worry about it. Why are you trying to lay up treasure on earth anyway? You should lay up treasure in heaven. So be that pure soul. Dedicate, pour your life out, because, as Abdul Baha said, become dust in the pathway of the loved ones, in service. His name meant servant of God.
Mm-hmm. So, what about our friend Brent Anderson? What should we say to him? He had me
well,
thinking
I
about
certainly,
and...
I do. Well, I guess I was doing so. Hopefully, if he's watching, he's reading between the lines. To just celebrate the power of the Bob's revelation and what he did, the turning point in history that he was. And the question is, do the followers live up to it? Jesus said, why do you call me Lord, Lord, and don't do the things that I say? And when Moses came down from the mountain, they made him put a veil over his face, right? And they were dancing around the golden calf. It's easy to think you're immune. Whatever religion you adhere to, it's easy to think you're immune. Oh, we're not like that. But we're taught to take ourselves into account every day, to do our best to live up to the standards of our religion, to keep it pure, to not trample it with our muddy feet. That's why I do sometimes challenge some of the thoughts that I see that I don't think are in adherence with the Word of God, right? Which is in this topic we've been talking about, reward and punishment. I'll just go back there. There is so much confusion since the declaration of the Bab and what Baha'u'llah brought. There's so much confusion as to how the swords get beat into plowshares, as to how the world becomes one. Mm-hmm. It is submission to the Word of God. It is Islam in that sense, submission to Allah. Islam means submission, right? It is submission to the law of God and the will of God. And a jihad, an internal struggle to day after day after day submit oneself, one's own desires, one's own thoughts, the vain imaginations and idle fancies that creep in about how it's going to unfold. The twin pillars of reward and punishment are not abolished by the introduction of the idea that we should be reducing extremes of wealth and poverty, which is not a new idea. It's new in its clarity and its emphasis because we have achieved a level of global civilization. We have achieved a level of conquest of nature, of harnessing of nature, of exercising our dominion to be able to unlock the secrets and extract the wealth of God's creation, to turn sand into instant intelligence and communications, right? The silicone chip, right? We've achieved this new level of capability and potential, such that it's a realistic dream to eliminate the extremes of wealth and poverty. But that doesn't mean the principles of how to do it are completely different, right? When you get to college, you don't unlearn your ABCs.
Yeah.
You don't unlearn your ABCs and forget that 1 + 1 = 2. Mm-hmm. Right? You still, in the revelation of Baha'u'llah, his son Abdul Baha says the farmer is the first active agent of civilization, and there should be more farmers than any other class of people in the new future civilization. That's like going backwards. Is that progress?
Yeah.
It doesn't feel like progress to the modern world, because in World War II in America, we had victory gardens and 40% of all Americans grew some or all of their own food. Today, it's less than 1%. And that's why we have such devastation in health and in the climate and all kinds of problems. So we got to get back to the garden, right? And that means going back and maybe studying Moses. studying, Abraham, studying why it was that God caused a flood to wipe out all of humanity under Noah, versus dancing under the rainbow, which was the symbol that God gave after the flood. He gave that symbol to say, I will never again destroy the earth with a flood. That's what the sign of the rainbow means in the Bible. But today we dance under the rainbow as a sign of pride to not have to submit to the natural order of the law of God, that he created us male and female.
Nice little pride thing in there. I get it. Yeah.
That he created us male and female, that the family is the foundation of civilization, that all these ideas about all these different kinds of families won't work, in the same way that the idea of communism didn't work. It won't lead ultimately to good results. And to get back to the original intent of creation means not running off a progressive cliff under the banner of progressive revelation, but understanding what the forces of integration mean, calling people back to God, remembering that this nation has the motto, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We don't become indivisible. We don't provide liberty and justice for all by abandoning the laws of God, by pretending that there should not be reward and punishment, that by professing some kind of ideology, we can eliminate extremes of wealth and poverty by regulating outcomes versus making sure that there is equal opportunity.
Well, pulling this back to the gate, and considering the celebration of tonight's event, how do we make our way back to the inspiration that is the Bob, and maybe take it from the standpoint of what would you recommend to somebody trying to?
You might start by downloading. Sorry for anyone who. Look, let me put it this way, because I'm going to address a concern that our dear friend Brent brought in, and let me share a little bit of that story. Brent discovered the writings of the Bob and was enamored by them, by their power, by their potency, and didn't necessarily see that same power and potency in those who professed to believe in him. But here's the problem. It could be said that nobody would know about Moses if it weren't for Christianity. The Jews were this little people, persecuted, hidden. If it weren't for Jesus and Christianity, would we have a Bible? Would Moses be spread around the world and be a household name if it weren't for Jesus? It's a little bit the same with the Bob and Baha'u'llah. Baha'u'llah is not intended to overshadow the Bob. God forbid. The Bob is a manifestation of God with full glory and power of any other manifestation. But the reason people know about the Bob is because of the Baha'i faith, right? So when I want to talk about the Bob, I was about to say, go download the Baha'i prayer app because it has the Bob's prayer in it. I don't want to overshadow the Bob by using the word Baha'i. But the only way you get to the Bob really is because the Baha'is are keeping his writings alive and spreading them. You follow me?
Mm-hmm.
So my point is, how do we celebrate, elevate the Bob? We'll get the Baha'i prayer app and you can read the prayers of the Bob. Or you can go online and research his writings, but you'll probably find them on the Baha'i Research Library is where you'll find them, right? Because the Baha'i faith is keeping the Bob's writings available and has published them in numerous books and volumes. You wouldn't have those if it weren't for the Baha'i faith.
Well, he's got this. So he's a friend of mine, Brent. He's been on the show before, and Brent's. I can say I was thinking there, Brent. And he's a smoker, and I believe he's got a pipe or two, right, with tobacco and stuff like that. So there you go, Brent. Put that in your pipe, and I can't say smoke it because that's dismissive, but ponder it. Put that in your pipe and think about it. Is that a good way to, hey, because it's like, keep wrestling with it.
So I will say this, for me, where I was coming from as a fundamentalist ex-minister
Mm-hmm.
who was fervently searching the horizons, figuratively, for signs of Jesus coming. And where is he? Why does my Lord delay his coming? What the heck on earth is God doing on earth? Where is he? It was the words of the Bob that spoke to me, the power of the language. So I get it. The language of the Bob was exactly what I expected to hear. It was exactly what I was looking for. The words of Baha'u'llah did not have that same impact on me because that's not where I was at. I was standing pounding on the gate. Where
Let me in.
are
Let me
you?
in. Yeah.
Or come out, get out here. Where are you? Why are you not here? Come clean up this mess. And boom, the Bob, direct, powerful, hard hitting. I come from a background of, speak the truth in love, meant boldly cry aloud and show my people their sins. And the Baha'i faith says, let your words always be mild as milk, right? Let your speech be grace seasoned with salt, right? Don't rub salt in the wounds. A little bit of salt goes a long way. You follow me? But you get this, you get this pendulum swing of lurching forward from ditch to ditch. I wanted to hit people upside the head with a 2x4 because I kind of liked being hit upside the head of the 2x4 and being told where I was wrong. Straighten up. This is the way. Walk you in it. Not, well, you've got a few options here.
Yeah.
So it's a matter of taste, personality, style, where you're at as to, whether the Hindu writings appeal to you or Buddhist writings appeal to you. I published a blog today about desire, inspired by the fact that in Buddhism, desire is the source of all pain.
Yeah.
So anyway, here we meander through this topic, but we can be grateful that in 1844, God sent a messenger called the Gate to declare who he was, and he backed it up with a nation that is one nation, 50 states under God, that collected through hell or high water all the peoples of earth into one vast continent under one banner of federal government, 50 nations, if you will, 50 states that are representatives of all the peoples of the earth, whether they were conquered indigenous peoples, whether they came voluntarily, as most of them did, or whether they were dragged here in slave ships.
Or draft the Dodger and went up to the Canada.
Canada, the promised land. Let's not go there. For the audience, I was born in Canada. But the point is, people from the whole planet were gathered here on this continent. We learned one language. We put a man on the moon. We are imperfectly progressing the human project of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. One nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. That's a high, lofty goal. Have we achieved it? Of course not. Will we ever achieve it perfectly? Maybe in 500,000 years. Maybe, right? But using history, comparing history, I've put out the challenge, show me any other people who is evidencing the signs of the dominion of the new revelation, and leading the way, lighting the way through a reflection, an imperfect reflection, a materialistic reflection of the spiritual revelation that came from the East, the sun from the East being reflected in the West. And all of that was inaugurated, in my opinion, on May 23rd, 1844, by the Declaration of the Bab. We have one thing left to do, and that is show you the sneak peek for our upcoming episode on Tuesday. Until then, may God be with you. And I do hope you'll dig into this a little bit more if it's new to you. Thank you, Dan, for being here.
You bet.
Hello, everyone. It's your host, Wade Franson, created in the image of God, here with a sneak peek of our upcoming episode with Ben Crawshaw of TrueFace. Now, Ben joined TrueFace as an editor and a writer, and he helped them write a book called The Path. TrueFace provides discipleship resources, and Ben is now the director of member engagement, and his focus is on going beyond knowledge and connecting with people, not trying to reach them so much intellectually, but rather connect with their hearts. Through that principle of love, Jesus said, love God, and the second commandment, love your neighbor, fulfills all the commandments of God. And this is what this is about. Welcome to the studio, Ben.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
So TrueFace has been around for, you said, 30 years. And how long have you been with it? And tell us a little bit more about what you do.
Yeah, TrueFace has been around for 30 years. I started a couple years ago, as you said, as an editor. And I was editing these materials and I was like, wow, this is really, really good stuff. And one of the things that TrueFace, our goal is to help stuck Christians get unstuck. And so one of the ways we do that is through encouraging these environments of high trust relationships. I mean, I grew up, learn more, KMDB, know more, do better, know more, do better. People have access to information now more than ever at their fingertips all the time. And so where we're growing is in knowledge. Where we're not growing is in trust. And so part of what we're trying to do is move from the left side of the brain to the right side of the brain, into the body, engage with emotions through trusted relationships. And so one of our goals at TrueFace is not just to give people more stuff to know, but to encourage them to live it out in the context of high trust, authentic relationships and community.
Well, there are various veils that keep us from seeing God. When Moses came down from the mountain, he had a veil. He was ordered by the people to put a veil over his face because they couldn't stand that much light, made them very uncomfortable. And I'm familiar with a quote that says the greatest of all veils, the most grievous veil, is the veil of knowledge. And I have personal experience as a pastor in a denomination that split down the middle and further fractured into multiple splits over picky little doctrinal issues and differences. I mean, some of them seem very big to us, but in the grand scheme of the body of Christ is not divided. Clearly, we were missing something. You're trying to reach young people. You do want them to grow in knowledge, but how do you overcome the fact that, doctrinal purity, it is, I'm not saying it's not important, but how do you address that with this focus on reaching the heart?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, first off, what I get asked about a lot, Wade, in working with the next generation is, oh, what about social media and the phones all the time? And I'm like, first of all, that adults are dealing with that too. But yes, when it comes to the next generation, they grew up in the digital age, the age of technology. I've heard you say not just a post-Christian, but a post-trust society, right? So if you're inundated with something all the time, then the opposite of that becomes more rare and therefore more appealing to a certain extent. For example, if you're eating fast food all the time, that at some point your body's like, man, maybe we should eat something different from this. Maybe I'm craving a home-cooked meal with some vegetables or something. I think in the same way, when it's just technology and digital engagement, where you're just learning more information, well, then experience becomes so rare. And how is experience transferred? Well, through authentic, trusting relationships. That is like the most unique thing you can offer, which is ironic because it's the most timeless thing, right? And that is found in the gospel, but an experience. Jesus didn't walk around and just tell people more knowledge. He engaged with them, looked them in the eye, and had authentic face-to-face connection and community with them. And so that's what we're trying to do, is not just say, here's a bucket load of information, learn this, do this, know more, do better. No, we're trying to engage people in a high trust, authentic experience not going after their heads necessarily, going after their hearts, because there's a lot of stuff going for their head right now.
Well, Ben, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us this morning to record this sneak peek. In my family, we have 2 teenagers. I'm the salad man, right? I was at Costco. I just bought a couple of new seasonings to mix those salads up, and I deliver these really awesome fresh salads with cucumbers and tomatoes and bell peppers and a lot of really nice dressing and herbs in there. And my kids, my 2 teenagers who love fast food, they will actually eat my salads. So for the audience, you should be prepared to be enjoying a wonderful big helping of fresh, crunchy, delicious, heart-reaching salad when you come and meet with us face to face with Ben from True Face and learn about that deep spiritual heart connection that God wants to have with us and wants us to have with each other. Do not miss the episode of Created in the Image of God with True Face. See you there.